Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
Ultras beat you up. Flat 24 hours absolutely destroy people. A lot of times you do other ultras and you can get caught on top of a mountain with weather. You know, I've had to retreat backwards on a course before because of lightning. And the easy way to describe it to even non-runners is this terrain that can take a week or two to backpack and see it all. Like, I see all of that in a weekend. Like, I don't even have to take time off work and I can experience this. And I can experience it, I don't know, once a month. Even if it doesn't go good, then I've got something, which is this great experience out here. Like on a track, it's like, well, I ran in circles for 17 hours and then I couldn't walk anymore and then I stopped. So unless you're trying to run over 150 miles, like, you probably should be run walking. A lot of things in life like this are not all science. They're part art and part science. And so appreciating the art is just as important. Early in my career, there was a period of a couple years where I literally stopped running with a watch because I was obsessing on it. And I had to run without it long enough to stop obsessing about it and then throw some luck on that and then throw 2 more keeping lumps of luck on top of that. You know, like 24 hours things can go wrong even if you've done everything right. This is Nick Coury and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio.
So it's just about 4 weeks since you broke the American record for the 24-hour race. I guess first and foremost, how are you feeling?
Almost really good, but I have a lingering leg issue. It seemingly, like, if you saw me at the end of the race, I felt really smooth, like shockingly smooth, and I looked really smooth from everything everyone's told me. And then once everything cooled down, suddenly, like, my right leg just like went into like a panic of what did you just do to me? And I was on crutches for about 2 days until I got some dry needling. There were just some crazy bad muscle knots in there. And that got me off the crutches, but I've still just, like, there's some muscles in there that just have a lot of thrashing, a lot of damage. So I still have a bit of a limp. I have only barely started to run again as a result. So my longest recovery in quite some time, which I have no regrets about because it was certainly worth it.
Yeah, it's quite an endeavor. And like I said, I have done Leadville a couple times. And so most of my friends or family, they have, and I think a lot of people maybe have one sort of idea in their head when they envision an ultra marathon. So when we were talking about your endeavor and telling people that you ran 173 miles on a 400-meter track at 24 hours, you know, the eyes kind of bug out of their head and their jaws drop. What is it about the 24-hour race that is so kind of alluring to you?
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things to me because I have kind of a love-hate relationship over the course of my running career with it, in that I seem to be most suited for it. I've had the most success at it, but it's the most brutal race format. Like, I've done hard rock, I've finished 5 times, I've run super mountainous stuff, and I love those. And those are the races I do when I want to go, like, have an experience and enjoy it. But something keeps bringing me back to this race format that just, like, annihilates people. Like, it doesn't just beat you up, like ultras beat you up. Flat 24 hours absolutely destroy people. Like, if you look at even like Desert Solstice is an elite of the elite race. Like, you have to be among the national class just to get in. And I think there were like 25 or 26 starters. And I think there were 5 or 6 people on the track at the end, still just moving in any way, shape, or form. And yeah, so what is it that draws me to it? And like, the easiest way for at least a runner to understand is to compare it to a marathon, where like a marathon is going to be painful and it's going to hurt. but it's also like finding a good course that's just a bit downhill and it's paved. As much as you don't want to pound the pavement, it's going to make you fast. And like you want to see like what you can accomplish. And you want to be able to compare your performance today against when you ran it last year and the year before. And so it's like the curiosity of being able to compare yourself, against every other person that's ever run it, to say what's humanly possible is 2 hours flat, and I can run 3 hours. I know how that compares. Or I can run 4 hours, and I ran 4 hours, but I ran 4.5 hours last time. And so like there's some element of comparability that's interesting. But then there's also this, like it's optimized. And so you can actually control things. Like a lot of times you do other ultras and you can get caught on top of a mountain with weather. I've had to retreat backwards on a course before because of lightning. Or you get hit with, snow or rain or crazy cold at night. Or just any random thing, and like the race, you don't know what's going to happen, and a lot of it's outside your control. And so one of the appeals of something like this is I can optimize everything, and I can see literally exactly how far it's possible for me to go in 24 hours. On a trail, it's hard to say that, and it's hard to even compare trail races against other trail races. Maybe I won this race. Is that a good performance? How does it compare to someone's race or even my own race at a different course? Like, I don't know. But any 24-hour I run, I'm pretty certain it's within a small percent of every other 24 I've run. So there's kind of like the analytical side that wants to see my own numbers, and then wants to see like how far I can push myself on the perfect day.
And what's the mindset difference between running, you're running 100 or 50, whereas this is a time and you're pushing the field goal back on yourself, right? You're going to go as far as you want to go. Is there a difference, or is it just like, I'm going 24 hours and I'm not stopping?
Yeah, it depends. Like my own approach has varied over time, I think. Where like earlier on my career, like the goal, as I described, is like it is how far I can go, versus a trail race. A lot of times, even trail races, when I want to perform well, I just as much want to have fun out there. And so like I'm not doing them just to see how far I can go or how fast I can go, let's say, in a mountain 100 or a mountain 50. Even if that's one of the goals, like it's also, I want to see the scenery. I want to experience this terrain. One of the things I like about trail ultras, and the easy way to describe it to even non-runners, is this terrain that could take a week or two to backpack and see it all. Like I see all of that in a weekend. Like I don't even have to take time off work, and I can experience this. And I can experience it, I don't know, once a month. It's kind of addicting. It's an excuse to travel somewhere to see all this stuff. And so like the biggest difference is that motivation doesn't exist. And the only thing left is the how fast I can go. And so, yeah, you start to have different goals and different approaches because of that, because there's not this secondary, well, at least if it goes good, or, even if it doesn't go good, then I've got something, which is this great experience out here. Like on a track, it's like, well, I ran in circles for 17 hours and then I couldn't walk anymore. And then I stopped. Like it's not the same appeal there. And so you've really, like, I think that's why the numbers are a lot lower at these. Is like if you don't have a good day, you don't have anything left except the performance that you had. And I think that's also maybe the appeal, is I like that challenge. And early on, as much as my goal was still the same, which is run as far as I could, I had a lot to figure out for a lot of years. I still have things to figure out, but I had broad strokes, I would say, earlier on in my career. Like I can make these seemingly huge gains in many places, whether that be getting better at training, like figuring out nutrition because your stomach goes sour and that takes you out of a race, or like the weather, the heat, shoes even are a big thing. Blisters can take people out of races. And so like any one of these things could take, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 100 miles off of a 24-hour performance, depending on how early it takes you out. And so along the way, as I figured more and more of those things out, I was able to focus on smaller and smaller things. The flip side being those smaller things get you smaller gains. You're now looking, well, I know I can run 140 miles And, my goal isn't going from 100 miles to 130 or 100, it's from going 140 to 145. Like the deltas get smaller and the tweaks that you can make get smaller because you've seemingly gotten the low hanging fruit. And that's, I think, more recently actually is still one of the appeals to me. I've got the analytical mind. I like to be really focused, detail oriented, find all those little things. And that's one of the things that's let me get to where I got, a month ago, is I just kept focusing on smaller and smaller things and trying to hit some version of perfection, I would say, which is tough to say, but there were really very few things that went wrong with my race, which even I find like unbelievable having done it myself over 24 hours in this format.
Yeah, my first ultra endeavor was a 24-hour race. It was in Philadelphia. It was a 8.5-mile loop, and I've done a couple other timed events. And to me, the mental component of a 24-hour race is so much more difficult than, say, running a 50-mile race or a 100-mile race, or maybe even going beyond 100 miles. I don't know if it's just knowing that when you get to X distance, you're done. And then I guess there's probably also that aspect of, like you said, you're in this amazing scenery. There's mountains around you. If you're in Scottsdale, there's giant cactuses. And, unless you live in that area, you're not accustomed to seeing, 20-foot high cactuses and stuff like that. But and part of it too is probably the pacing component of it as well. But I have always struggled, and that's kind of what still piques my interest of running a 24-hour race and on the track too, because I ran in college and I enjoyed the rhythmic aspect component of running on the track, and as opposed to like the undulations of cross country and road racing and stuff like that. So I can appreciate it, but I still have yet to be able to wrap my mind around it. Do you find that the mental aspect of racing on the track is more of a challenge than, say, the mental aspect of like a hard rock?
It's definitely much harder. And one of the biggest things that I think I even have interesting perspectives on, because early on in my career, I would get super bored out there and I would play the craziest mental games to try to stay engaged. And I would make a lot of mistakes because of boredom, like directly, not even indirectly. It's like you get bored, so you start speeding up, or you start throwing in little sprints because they feel good and they kind of change things around. But those are probably not a great idea in the grand scope of things. And so early on, it's that. And then in the middle of my career, I tried to get more planned about it. And I do these things where all I do is I can only pay attention to 15 minutes of a race. And so all I have to do at any given time is, whatever it is, 6 laps to hit a 15-minute chunk. And then each 15-minute chunk, 4 of them adds up to an hour. And then 4 hours adds up to 4 hours, which is a turnaround, and you get to go the other direction on the track. And then you add that up 6 times, so I kind of break it up into these mental milestones. And I think another change for me recently, and it just might be, doing it too many times. I don't know, maybe burning out too many brain cells, or I don't know what, but I have now less and less problem with that. And I just actually enjoy being out there, and I kind of get into I call it like a meditation, and it's not exactly meditative, but I really enjoy that runner's high, I guess is a way to put it, the feeling of moving. And I just try to embrace that and be I'm so blessed that I can be out here and just moving and enjoying this sport that I love. And there's something kind of calming that I've come to a place that helps me to not get so bored out there, because it might just be I've gotten good enough that I'm not in pain all the time out there for most of the race now, and that's allowed me to continue to feel mentally good because I feel physically better than I used to. But yeah, I've definitely improved year over year on that front. And the other thing I'll mention, because this is surprising to people, is I vastly prefer the 400-meter track to what a lot of other 24 hours have, which is a loop from a mile to 8 miles, could be on, a paved loop in a park, could be lightly groomed trails. I actually prefer the track all day. And the surprising reason why is because, sure, during the day, a track is more boring. But the day is the easy part. Like everyone makes it through the first 8 to 12 hours. It's the second half through the night that's the really challenging part, not only because you get tired, but you're out in a park and there's these super dim park lights that are scattered, every 100 feet. And you start going into this like psychosis of like, you feel like you're going out of your mind. You're like half falling asleep on your feet. There's no one around you to like engage with or chit chat. You see people like, I don't know, like once or twice a loop. And then you end up freezing out there too, because it's out in wherever it may be. And so you struggle so much through the night just because of that. Versus on the track, you flip on the big floodlights and you look around and you see still a bunch of people. You see crews, you see runners. And like one of the big aspects of ultras that I think draws most people in is the social aspect, is you can actually chit chat and engage with people and like make some jokes even when you're both at your lowest and like someone's over there puking or whatever. And you get so much more of that throughout the entire night. It just like the lights make it feel like it's perpetually 9 p.m. and you don't even realize that it's like 2, 3 a.m. except however bad you're feeling. But then, yeah, you also get that social aspect, that engagement that just keeps you more aware and alert.
Did you have a track background? Did you always like doing the 24-hour races on the track, or did you grow into that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I had a track background originally doing high school running. I did cross country track. That's where I got my start. So I did 800 mile, 2 mile, and then when I did my first ultra with my two brothers, Jamil and Nathan, in 2005, and it was a 500 meter dirt loop. It was a 12-hour night race. And then that was a training run for a 24-hour race. We also signed up, and it was one of those, we had no clue what we were doing for either of them. And just went out there, and it was the funkiest thing. And somehow we were addicted because of all the weird, crazy characters out there. So like, yeah, our first ultras were in this format. And so I think that was our default. And then we kind of found the trail, like we knew the trail ultras were out there. And once we did those, we're like, we're going to do tons of these. But that's where my appreciation and my love for it came from, and keeps bringing me back to it. Real early on, actually, that second ultra, completely out of nowhere, Giannis Kouros, who held or holds most of the like multi-day and 24-hour plus records, he stayed with us. He needed a host. He was doing a race in Arizona, and so we got, like, without really knowing who he was, we hosted like the greatest living runner for a week. And I'm certain that also played a big part, is then diving into the history and understanding, just how insane it is to run 188 miles in 24 hours. So, yeah.
Now, going back and looking at this race, can you pinpoint the difference between this performance and the ones prior, or did you just have a good day and chalk it up to that?
Yeah, it's definitely not just having a good day. It was a phenomenal day, like a really good day, but that wasn't, it wasn't random that the day was good. It was really the opposite. So a year ago when I ran Desert Solstice, I guess 3 years ago, I ran Desert Solstice. I ran 155 miles, and it was at like the absolute limit of what I was capable of. And I know because I shot for 154 because I thought it would take 154 to make the US national team that goes to the World 24-hour. And I didn't think I could hit it. I thought on my best day I could get over 150, but I thought maybe 152, 153. My PR at the time was 139. And so, yeah, I went for 154, figuring, well, I'll even pace it. If I fall off a bit, I might still hit close to that. And like, had a good day overall. I had plantar fasciitis at the time, so every single step from the first hurt. And so it wasn't even an enjoyable day. I did not have fun at that race, but I completely stuck to my plan. I dialed in everything. I'd run the best training of my life at that point. And I made this huge kick at the end to hit 155. And so beat my expectations, was really blown away that I was able to accomplish that. So two more years before I did Desert Solstice again, trained even harder, brought in a bunch of new different techniques to try, like, if this is the best I was in 2018, how can I improve? And I asked that question, and I tried to find all the big ways I could. I went deep into, like, I'd experimented with high fat, low carb, like fat optimization diet, and I went deeper on that and practiced it more and got much better. I did a bunch of other things to improve my recovery. I adopted super shoes. So super shoes, like the marathon and below, work phenomenally at flat 24 hours. I'm a huge believer, but they're brutal for that long. Like they're not really stable enough to go that long unless you can handle them. And so I had to do a ton of training in them to strengthen a lot of muscles and things like that. So I was doing all these different things. I came back a year ago. I was on pace for 167 at 19 hours and starting to negative split again. And then I like hardcore bombed out. There was, I think, a period of almost an hour where I just straight up sat and was like, I'm done. I'm not going to move again. I have the lead and no one's going to catch me and I don't want to run. And I just didn't. And then second place, who had also stopped, started slowly staggering around the track. And after a couple laps of him doing like 16-minute laps, he picked it up to like 14-minute laps. And I was doing the math, and I was like, at this pace, he's just going to barely catch me at 24 hours. And so I got out there and started staggering 20-minute laps. And then he inched it faster and I inched it faster. And then we went back and forth, inching our speed up, back and forth until I was doing low 8 minutes a mile and he was doing 7 something a mile at the finish. And so, yeah, I didn't want to get out there, but I did for that. It was a great, fun finish for the spectators, not for me. But I ran 155 again. So no better than the year before, or than 2 years before. And even like my projected 167, like my quads gave out initially, but something else would have. Like if I think back to it, like I was kind of on edge from about 8 hours in, and could feel things like were more stressed than they should be that early in the race. So with all of that, after the race, for whatever reason, I couldn't stop thinking, well, I could have run 167 if I just didn't have the quad issue, and then whatever else would come up, maybe I can fix those things. And so I'm like, well, like 167 is huge. It's 12 more miles than I've done before. I think I could do that. And then I'm like, well, what if I get that and then I can train even harder and get even better and inch that up? You could hit 170. And like 170 is like a number I never would have ever thought about. Like 2 Americans had ever done that before. And the American record was 172.46. But 170 is not that far from 172. So if I'm going there, like, why not train just a little harder? And so like, it was like this in my head, both crazy idea, but also I couldn't get out of my head. And so all I kept doing over and over again is telling myself, I'm going to find a way to do this. And every time I looked at it, and like I run more numbers than almost anyone and have a really good approach to figuring out what's realistic. And every time I'm like, it's not realistic, but I used that to drive myself to say, what more can I be doing? Like, it doesn't matter what improvement I make. I just have to make any improvement and figure out one more improvement. And then I kind of, look at where I'm at and one more improvement, and I'm still so far, and one more thing. And I basically started doing that in January last year. And thing after thing, like in my mind, it was a fraction of a percent at a time, because that's really what it was. I just kept finding more things, little and big, and tackling them and like religiously adding them into my routine, figuring out a way that I'm going to either like get more fitness so that I can have a higher upward potential, or like reduce the risk, because half of the 24-hour isn't what your potential is. It's making it less likely something's going to go wrong, because everything's going to go wrong. And so the less things that go wrong, the more distance you're going to end up with at the end of the day. So kind of those things combined, it just kept like whittling away thing after thing, like dozens and dozens of things, trying to get more and more improvement. And it was a time trial I did 5 weeks before the race. In November, I did 100K. And like the actual number I hit, and looking at where that projected my fitness, was the first time I thought there might actually be a long shot at me actually hitting this thing.
Was that on the same track?
No, it was another one in town. Okay. Tracks are difficult during COVID to get into.
I want to get into some of the things you just mentioned, but before we get too far away from it, from what I remember reading about, you and Jamil and your brother, your other brother, was that you guys did that first 12-hour race when you were still in high school, correct?
Yeah, like Nathan and I had done like a high school 5K invitational meet that morning.
Okay.
And then went and ran this ultra at night, like not thinking anything of it.
So where did the idea come from as high school kids to do something like that? Because I feel like a lot of people, they get into ultra running I mean, now you're seeing younger and younger athletes getting into ultra running, but I feel like, I'm 45 and I didn't run a marathon until probably 2010. So the thought of, someone saying, hey, Rich, let's go do a 12-hour race at night, when I'm 16, 17, 18 years old would have been so foreign to me. Where did that come about? And, what was the appeal of that? Was one brother more into it or encouraging or?
Yeah, so Jamil drove it because like none of us were fast enough for Arizona State's team where we all went. And so once he graduated, he got a bit into the road racing scene, built up into the marathon, got to know some different runners, like ended up getting into like the small group of trail runners that existed in Phoenix at the time. It feels like it was probably a couple dozen people and you just had to stumble into them somewhere to find out they exist. And yeah, just kind of got plugged into some of the race calendars and saw this thing, and it was free and it was an all-night run. So I think in our minds, as high schoolers, like we're kind of a goofy bunch. It felt like a sleepover, but also running, and we're runners. And like Jamil's like, you guys want to do this? And we're like, sure. And we brought two of our like high school friends from the cross country team that also had no idea what they were getting into. And I don't think have run an ultra since. It felt less like I don't think we really understood what an ultra was. My longest run at the time was 13 miles. And I wasn't thinking like I'm going to run over 50 miles, but I ran over 50 miles. It was just like, we're going to go hang out all night and run some. And we'd like sprint some laps and then jog some laps and then sprint some more and sit around and eat pretzels and drink Gatorade because that's what was on the one table out there. And then get told the same story for the fourth time by some old guy who, repeating himself all over. Yeah.
I think everyone knows that guy. That's awesome. Yeah, it seems so foreign to looking back on my high school and college career. Like it was just not something that was, I don't even think I knew of it really to that extent. Was your coach, was he upset by the fact that you guys went and ran 50 miles?
Yeah, luckily it was Labor Day weekend. And I remember because I needed that Monday to recover enough to hide it from my coach. Like we definitely never told him. We just came to Tuesday and tried not to limp too much from being so sore.
Yeah, good move. Good move. So getting back into Desert Solstice, a couple things you mentioned with the negative splitting, and you also mentioned, being fat adaptive and experimenting with that along the way and having some success with that. Is that something that do you adhere to, say a ketogenic diet in your day-to-day practice, or do you look to consume more fat day to day, or is it something that you practice more in your race fueling?
Yeah. So like when I first started playing around with it, I think it was 2014. I would do it for 2 to 3 months leading up to 100, like thinking the idea sounded good, that you get fat adapted and that's going to be advantageous for 100 miles. And I generally found it to be true, but like I had, especially early on, some hesitancy. I suppose do. In terms of like, I love carbs, like cookies and ice cream and pizza are delicious.
They're pretty good.
Like it's hard to avoid, like, not that I eat very much of that anyways, but like the idea of like going away from carbs isn't very appealing to me. And that's why I would do it periodized to start. And then like 2019 is where I kind of went full bore, like preparing for like the build up for the 2020 Desert Solstice. Trying to optimize more things and going full time, I definitely found additional benefits from it. Like my recovery seemed to substantially speed up. My training runs seemed to take less out of me. And so like, those are some of the benefits I saw. And so I like at this point, I mostly do it all the time. But even now, like after a big race, I'll go off of it for a while for the same reason. And even then, like OFM is probably like optimized fat metabolism is a better term than keto itself, because I also am not like strict keto on multiple levels. So usually if you're like ketogenic for a dietary reason, they say, you know, don't go above 30 or 50 grams a day, and try to be lower than that. And like, I'm certain I don't have any days down at 30. Like running more miles, you can get away with less. And then just, yeah, I focus a lot on the mental side of things, meaning like the mental well-being. Like if you're going to stress that much about what you eat, you're going to have probably worse effects than any dietary swing. And so like, yeah, I generally try to eat minimal carbs, and the carbs I eat, I want to be very high quality so that I'm going a long way. You know, it's mostly like vegetables are my big carb source on a day in, day out basis. But then also like one of the differences between like normal ketogenic and like the OFM approach is you strategically time carbs. And so like 1 to 3 days a week, usually it's before a speed work day, before a long run, and sometimes I have 2 of one of those. You want that extra punch. Like if you're just straight low carb, you kind of miss those couple extra gears at your top end where you feel flat if you really try to push it. And so like if you take in carbs the night before or the day before, like as long as you're doing most other things right, you kind of stay in a ketogenic state anyways, especially when you're very active, burning a lot of calories. You know, it's super easy for me running 100+ mile weeks. Like you don't even like pop out of ketosis as you traditionally feel it, where you start feeling weird. But then you have those carbs, and then you burn through them during the next day's morning run and have a super high quality workout. And it almost feels even better than normal because your body's not used to them. So it's like rocket fuel almost. And then kind of go back into the normal flow there. So like that's largely been my approach. Peter Defty, who's the Vespa guy, if anyone knows what that is, I hired him when I got serious about it because he gave me a bunch of other tips, and nutritionally coached me for about 6 months to like figure out all these things, not just the like, how do I stay low carb, but how do I not worry about when I'm not low carb? Because that was also key to the lifestyle for me, is making it sustainable, making it not high stress, to be like, to not feel restrictive.
When you're racing, what do you ingested on those race days? And I know, you know, at ultras, you know, they always got the gummy bears and the chips, and in those later miles, those taste really good. Do you mess with any of that in those later miles, or are you strictly performance and you're, you know, fat adapted that whole time?
Well, I don't do anything fat adapted specific during the race. I do the opposite. I do almost all carbs because that's all I'm burning. I haven't found any problem. Like the biggest tweak I make is I don't really eat much for the first hour, or I don't eat anything for the first hour, which seems to give my body the baseline of fat burning. And then I just start cranking on carbs, you know, I don't know, somewhere between 250 and 350 an hour, if I had to guess. I don't really measure that either, but I think it's in that range, which is probably mid to high end for a lot of people. I mean, which part of it is I'm running fast enough to burn a lot. But yeah, I do fruit smoothies, which actually caused some issues during the race. I'll do gummy bears, actually gummy worms. I'll do granola bars, pita, avocado, hummus wraps. Those were the big things that I did. And then like anyone, if I need something else, I just grab whatever else. I put a little protein powder into the smoothies, just because I think it's like, I know you can deplete a little bit of protein, so I try to get just a trace amount in there as well.
What were you putting in those smoothies? Could you pinpoint any one particular item in the smoothie that might have caused you some GI issues?
Oh, it's just, this is a known issue that I've been ignoring because energy-wise, they're super rock solid for me. Like on the two ends, the reason I ended up at smoothies, on the one end is like really sugary things, your goos, your sports drinks, all that. And those, like, I get burned out on fast. Like they just start like, it feels like it coats my tongue and I feel sick and nauseous from overdoing that simple sugar. And then the other end, which is like the real food, it just bogs you down and it feels heavy in your stomach. So the fruit smoothies were my perfect middle ground for a long time, where like it's clean energy and it's not bogging you down, but it also goes through you really quick. And that ended up being the problem. I think just all the fiber got things moving too much, too often.
Gotcha. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Vespa? I've seen it. I know some friends that are runners that have used it. I've never gotten my hands on it, but for the people that are, it's a pretty unique product. So for the people that are listening, if you could kind of break that down a little bit for it, or what the benefits are.
Yeah, so Vespa, the main like compound of interest in Vespa is this amino acid that increases fat metabolism temporarily. And so I used it before I ever tried going fat adapted. I actually think it's more useful when you're not low carb, because I found the biggest benefits when I was high carb, and it gives you somewhat similar benefits to if you were low carb, meaning your body now burns, I don't know, 100, 200, I don't know what the number would be, calories more per hour from fat for, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, somewhere in there. I'll usually take one every 2 to 3 hours. And so like on the one hand, if you have trouble getting enough food down, it causes nausea or anything like that, you can get away with eating a little less food. On the other side, if you don't really reduce your food much, I treat it like an insurance policy a lot of times, that if something goes wrong and you find yourself for 3 hours with a bad stomach, or especially like the heat of the day when that happens to almost everyone, now you can ride out those periods a lot more easily. And so like, it's definitely worth trying, because I know a few people that I know of have tried it and it didn't quite sit with them right. But on the flip side, I've saved way more people than that's races when it was going south and I'm pacing them and they're puking up everywhere and every piece of food they put in their mouth just comes right back out. And then a Vespa, get it to stay down for 15 minutes. And suddenly like energy starts coming back into the body and you start being able to move more reliably, because now you don't have to eat so much to get some additional calories, going into your muscles, giving you energy to move forward. And so like I was actually a super skeptic before I ever tried it, because I'd see it in the back of Ultra Running magazine and you look it up and you're like, this is like $7 a pop and there's not even calories in here. Like, what kind of snake oil is this? And then a friend gave me 2 pouches before a race where like it was supposed to be 60 degrees and it turned out to be 40 and pouring rain the whole time, and like 30 to 40 mile an hour gusts of wind on the ridges, and a 30% finish rate, and everyone was going hypothermic, including me. And so for the last 30 miles, I actually couldn't consume any calories I brought with me because my hands were frozen and I couldn't open gel packets. Like I would try to grip them and I couldn't physically grip the packets to open them. But I had these 2 Vespas and I'd taken one right before my hands stopped working at 20. And then I had someone at mile 35 feed me the other one at an aid station. And so I think I had 300 calories the last 30 miles by like picking up chunks of potatoes with my stubby fingers. And that's all I got. And I had 0 bonk, 0 energy issues. And like, there's no way at that point in time in my running career, I could do the last 30 of a 50 on essentially no calories. So that pretty well sold me that it works for me at least. And I've used it ever since. And I've had like minimal real nutritional problems since then. And I actually have found if I tried to eat as much as I normally did, I would feel bloated because my body just didn't need as many calories as I was used to. So.
And so when you were having the issues from the smoothies, did you back off the smoothies a little bit and rely on that a little bit more? Or was it kind of, yeah.
Yeah. It's like back off on that. And I know I can get by with a little less. I knew at the output I was going, which is whatever it is, 7 miles per hour. Like that's a lot more calories than I'm used to burning. So I didn't want to back off too much, but I switched to, and my crew helped me with like more solid foods. Like James Benet, my coach, he started giving me toast, which like to try to soap it up, which totally worked. Like I'm like, I don't like toast right now, but I kept eating it and it definitely like got better as I went.
Okay. And I assume if you're covering that much ground in 24 hours, because the question I always get asked from people is like, you ran 100 miles like without stopping? And I'm like, well, I mean, kind of, yeah. I mean, you have aid stations where you get food, you might change your socks or you get a different pack or whatever. But I'm assuming for you and your effort on a 400-meter track, other than maybe a pit stop at the porta potty, you were not stopping at all. Am I correct?
Yeah. The porta potty was the only reason I stopped the whole race.
How much of how long did it take you to get to that point where you're running that far and you're not stopping at all? Because you know, a lot of times in ultras, people are walking a huge majority of it. Was it right out the gate you were able to have that kind of mindset of I'm going to keep moving, or was it slowly over time you kind of got to that point?
Yeah. So like my overall perspective on this, when I ran 139, I walked that race. Like I had planned walk breaks from the beginning of the race. And I think I was on pace for 145 plus. I had a rough end of that race as well. And when I did 155, that was the first 24-hour that I tried to run every step and did. But Bob Hearn, who was 1 mile behind me, also did a run walk. I think he was walking something like 1 minute out of every 10 or 30 seconds out of every 10 minutes or something like that. But like from the start, planning on walking. So unless you're trying to run over 150 miles, like you probably should be run walking just because like you don't need to run the whole thing to go that fast. And most people struggle with going out too fast. And the easiest way to get around that is to put in walk breaks early and often.
So my follow-up question to that is, do you train walking? Like, do you go out just for walks, or at that time when you were doing the run walk, were you training your walking?
I, like a lot of things, I do enough specificity to feel not just comfortable, but confident of how I'll do during the race. So if I'm doing hard rock, I go and practice enough hiking that I'm confident I can do it for miles and miles. If I'm doing a 24-hour, I will practice enough, not just walking, but walking like I will do in the race to be confident about the aspects of that. So specifically in this case, it's not just, I would not want to go for a 3-mile walk. I would want to go for a 20 or 30 mile run where I do the walk break at the same intervals that I would do during the race, because you don't want to miss important nuances of it. Like it's actually really disruptive to go from a run to a walk and then back to a run. Like the starting and stopping, especially as you get more tired, like you can end up hurting yourself worse by making that transition than anything, unless you've practiced it, you've built up the muscles to handle that smoothly in between and make that feel as natural as anything else you're doing.
Interesting. What is your, for someone who was to get signed up for a 24-hour race, would you say like 1 minute walking it for every 10 minutes, or would you have a different strategy, or what was your strategy?
I'd say, yeah, like somewhere between, depending on what the goal is, like somewhere between 10 and 20% walking is probably a reasonable ballpark. And then just picking an interval that sounds good to you. And like, it almost doesn't matter as long as it makes sense. So maybe someone likes to, do it by every 3 laps, I get to walk half of the 4th lap. Or someone else might like doing it by a watch because you can set a timer. And yeah, like I've heard everything from like 5 minutes every hour to, multiple times an hour, run, walk. So yeah, it might be appealing, just whatever is going to keep you excited about it.
Okay, cool.
You seem someone who's very calculated, and you don't do anything that hasn't been thought through. Do you feel like that is your edge, and has that been a hindrance at times as well?
So it's definitely my edge. In many ways, I think that I do it out of necessity. That like if you look at like the people that are the best in the country or the world, like they tend to blow up onto the scene and quickly rise, and they show tons of potential. Like it's taken me 20 years of running to get to this point. That's not me. So like years ago, I knew like I'm good. I can make the varsity cross country team after a year or something on a very mediocre high school team that isn't in a competitive state. But I'm not kidding myself that like I'm not the best out there. And so the more I've wanted to improve, the more I've had to refine these things, because my genetics, well, like certainly good, are not the best in the world. And so like that's been my way of trying to bridge the gap and keep improving and get better and better. But as far as, is it a hindrance? Like, absolutely. And that is another thing I've had to like, it's one of those things, a lot of things in life like this are not all science. They're part art and part science. And so appreciating the art is just as important. And so, everything like early in my career, there was a period of a couple years where I literally stopped running with a watch because I was obsessing on it. and I had to run without it long enough to stop obsessing about it. Eventually it stuck. And now, like, I almost don't care about my watch on runs. Like, I know what my watch will do for me. Like, nothing on a run itself. It's only like tracking my overall fitness so that I understand where it's at objectively, not based on what I think I'm at. It's like specific reasons why I use it. And the same principle applies to a lot of other things. Like, even being out there on the track this year, some of my biggest gains weren't the obsessive attention to detail. It was understanding how to still, like, while not losing track of that, zone out and actually appreciate and enjoy, kind of like we talked about at the beginning, like just being out there, like at least once an hour, if not more. I would just take a deep breath, kind of look around me. Like, the track had like a new grass field had just been installed. It was like bright and green. The track's this deep red. There's these white contrasting lines. There's like all these smiling faces of crews. And everything else out there, especially like the late in the race, like the sunrise out there. And like, it sounds like weird for me to throw that in with all this obsession about times and splits and nutrition and all that, but I think that was one of the biggest gains I made, was changing my mentality and how I thought about it and how I enjoyed it and how much I appreciated just like the opportunity to be out there on not just the race, but the preparation, like every step of the way. And like, that was as important as anything.
You've mentioned the mindfulness of and the zenness of, running 24 hours. Has that been something that you've practiced outside of running, or is it kind of like the run walk approach where you're going to go out for a run and then also practice your walking?
Yeah, I think it's more happening in runs. Like, I was talking to someone about this earlier today, that I'm one of those aspirational meditators that like once a year goes and downloads some meditation app and goes through the first 3 lessons and like, yeah, this will be great. I know all the studies and research on it. And then never, like, not until the next year. So I'm not that good at, like, mindfulness is the popular term is thrown around today. But I do consider running itself to be a similar activity where, even me, like long miles, I listen to plenty of podcasts and audiobooks, but I make sure to have enough runs, especially my trail runs, where I don't bring anything with me, like other than the watch, throw the technology aside and just go be out there and enjoy it. And then I think the other piece that was, in hindsight, key to some of my biggest improvements, but also it wasn't deliberate along the way, is I did a lot of races because I'm a race junkie. You can ask my wife and she'll complain about it, and how many races I do, because I do enjoy races from the competitive side. But one of the things that happened this year is, with this whole negative splitting thing, the more I did it and the more I felt good at the end of races, I built some sort of muscle memory for like feeling like just elated and stoked and so excited and feel super good late in an ultra specifically. So like, after being tired sometimes all day, like just feeling great and running my fastest miles late in a race, everything from a bunch of like 50Ks to 50 miles I did to like 100 miles I did around another track in June, and just closing super fast, or end up like sprinting like 6-minute miles at the end. And it turns out I hadn't intended, like I had done that to practice the negative splitting concept. But what I didn't expect is how much it just reinforced in my own brain and my own emotions, like how fun and joyous I get at the end of a 24-hour, which is not a thing that happens at 24 hours. Like, no one is feeling good at a 24-hour, much less like stoked. And I would have told you that, yeah, I'm still not going to feel good out there. Like, even if I manage the race okay, even if I can run the fastest out there, I'm still going to feel like garbage at the end. Except that wasn't the case at this year's race. Is the end, like, I did feel like I had run for 24 hours. There's no getting around like the fatigue, but I felt smoother and I felt like in a better mental state at the end than I was at the beginning.
And I know this is kind of a general question, but what do you think the key is to negative splitting in a 24-hour race? Is it because you're so calculated with everything else that it's easy to kind of get there? Because I mean, a lot of people can't even negative split in a 5K. So I would assume a 24-hour race, that's a pretty big endeavor. And at the end, when you don't have much to kind of pull from and you're digging the deepest, like, That seems pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, like other ultras, there's probably an easier answer, which is like you practice and you plan and all that stuff. A 24-hour is like all of that and then a lot more, and there's definitely no simple way, and then throw some luck on that, and then throw 2 more heaping lumps of luck on top of that. You know, like 24 hours, things can go wrong even if you've done everything right. And so like there's, even if I were to do, 10 more 24 hours equally prepared, it's a crapshoot how many of them would just run into a problem and that would end the race. Like, it happens very quickly, and it happens usually very permanently, or permanent enough that anything left doesn't resemble the race you wanted. And so, yeah, the 24 specifically, I think it's the same approach as other ultras. It's just a lower chance of success and a much higher benefit from getting all the little details right. But the other concepts that would apply both to 24 and anything else are like, a lot of it's practice and working your way up to it. It's just like training. The more repetition you do, you figure out yourself. Like, as much as like I've written some blog posts to try to share my experiences and encourage others to try, I'm curious to see others try, because I think a lot of it ends up being personal, figuring out what works for you. For me, in the beginning of races, one of the keys is I visualize running my strongest miles late in the race. And I also tell myself over and over as people blow by me, like, I'm going to see you later. I'm going to see you later. I'll definitely see you later. And that helps to keep me slow and calm early on, like not get the FOMO that I'm being left behind. But then it's in the middle. A lot of it for me was a lot of practice, and then a lot of confirmation when I did it right. And then the opposite when I would do it wrong, where you have lots of doubts. I still have doubts in the middle. Like, that person is so far ahead of me. Like, am I going to catch them? I know I've done it before, but I don't know if I will. And so every time you feel that way in the middle of a race, and then associate it after the race with, yeah, I passed that person at like 60 miles, not even 80 or 90. It then creates that reinforcement and that confidence that what you're doing is going to work again. And it sometimes takes practicing that to get used to the feeling, so you can trust them.
And you said, like, when someone passes you going super fast in the beginning, you kind of have that little, like, I'm going to see you. Do you have little mantras you say to yourself to kind of keep you going or get you through those tough spots?
I think I have versions of them. Like, I don't know if I have as many verbal mantras as I think I try to make routines. And those help too. Kind of talking before, like, how do I manage races that long? And there's still versions of that I have, which is, yeah, like every hour, okay, I get another smoothie. Or like, I've started to help. One of the logistical things I started doing recently is I have a Ziploc bag every single hour with the things I need for that hour. And so it makes it easy on my crew, and it makes it easy on me. Like, sometimes the bags have like one thing in it just so it wasn't empty. But it builds in that routine, and it builds in that regularity where, like, you just have little things to keep your mind busy if you need them. Like, you don't always need them, but when you want them, like, oh, I'm 20 minutes to getting my next, baggie of food, and then I'm 15 minutes and then 10 minutes. So like, you don't know when you're going to feel bad or you're going to want a distraction. And so I do have those little things that if I need the distraction, I can get it.
Talking about, the numbers and stuff, and also getting rid of your watch and being comfortable with that in the race itself, are you worrying about your splits, or do you kind of have just the feel for it, the flow of what's going on, or are you just, and maybe keeping mindful of the race clock?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting aspect, because I'm completely opposite on different races. Meaning at Hard Rock in 2017, which is the last time I ran it, and the first time I tried like a negative split-ish effort at a big race. And like, I was about even effort, given the second half is harder. I was slower the second half, but like it would adjust terrain-wise to be about equal. I didn't wear a watch at all, and I was within 3 minutes of all my projected splits through the first like 60 some miles. And then I blew away the rest of the splits late in the race. So like that race, I ran 0 watch without feel, and I was still right where I thought I'd be. So I certainly have the ability to run by feel like that. But then looped races like this, I do the opposite, which is I actually click my watch every single lap, and the only data field I have is a lap time. So I just have a giant number of the minutes and seconds for that lap, and I'm actually looking at it every 1 to 200 meters during the entire race. And the reason I say it's opposite but kind of the same is I had, in order to be able to handle that level of like analyticalness about it, I had to not care about it while also looking at it that often. And so it's almost just like it's like wearing shoes or swinging arms for me at that point, where I don't stress about it. Whatever the number says, I almost don't care, other than like making micro adjustments to make sure I'm going the pace I want. And part of that is like it's easy on a track, especially to go wildly off your pace if you're not paying attention to it. So I'm sure I would be near the right pace, but it's one of those attempts at another optimization that I seem to have gotten down. So while I watch it, I don't stress at all about it. And I have a similar mindset to if I didn't have it at all.
Okay. And, you know, talking about being confident early on and being patient early on, having that mindset of like, I'll see you later. I'm going to see you in 20 miles. I'll see you in 30 miles. What was at any particular time, what was the biggest gap that you had to kind of overcome to get into the lead?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what the miles gap, but it was probably 10 miles.
Wow.
I do know it was like 6 hours into the race. I was in 13th place overall. Meaning, 12 people, men and women, were ahead of American record pace at that point.
That's crazy.
Wow. That's wild. And so my last question would be on this side of the things, knowing that you're training for or racing a 24-hour race on the track, and you mentioned you did 100K as a time trial, and I think you said you also did a 100-miler. How often leading into an event like this are you actually doing your actual run on the track?
A rough estimate is I did 1,000 to 1,500 miles this year on a track in various forms. So quite a bit of mileage. More as the race gets closer, I get heavier on it. Like the last three. Well, actually, I mean, this year it was pretty even because I did another 24-hour and 100-mile on a track. So anytime I'm prepping for a race, I try to do a bunch of 20 to 30-mile runs to get used to the curves. Like at Desert Solstice specifically, the people that run into the biggest issues are trail runners that come and don't prepare for the flat, and especially don't prepare for that many curves over and over again. It just destroys, like, even though you switch directions every 4 hours, like you wear out all those stabilizer muscles that you're not used to using that repetitively. Like overall, one of the biggest problems with the track is because it's relentlessly consistent. Like once one muscle stops feeling good, it only wears out more. Like you get zero relief. You don't get to switch up your, like uphill, downhill, like, camber this way or that. There's none of that. It's just relentless, like the same exact stride over and over again. And so if something starts hurting, like it's almost guaranteed to take you out of the race because it will only get worse. And so that's one of the reasons I do so many miles on the track, especially now, like to the extent I can handle them. You don't want to hurt, like anything, you don't want to hurt yourself by overdoing it. But if you can handle it, you'll do better by preparing more on the surface like this.
Okay. And with that 4 hours, you switch directions. Are you just getting to the start finish area and then turning around? Or is it like they blow a horn and everyone just turns and goes the opposite way?
Yeah, they do it on a complete lap. So they stick a cone out over the timing mat and then you loop around.
Gotcha.
Will you like switch lanes, or does that not matter because you're still going in a circle?
Yeah, so like the technical rules are on the curves, there's cones out and you can't cross inside of those. And then the straightaways, it technically actually doesn't matter because you can't cut the course on a straight line. And then when you do the flip, the courtesy is you stay on the outside until you passed everyone and let the people on the inside keep that. And then, within 2 minutes, everyone's gone through and then you're back to normal.
And you said like those, there's certain muscles that just wear from being on a track. Did you find out about that the hard way, or did you have someone help you with that? Because that was not anything I thought of. And like, oh, wow, yeah, probably going around in a circle for that long might hurt you. Was that something that you had an issue with in prior races?
Like I've definitely had issues with it at plenty of races. I don't remember the first time I figured it out. I think people have probably mentioned it to me, but I think I just realized it early on too when I was trying to train for these. I think I started training for the looped races and then realized, oh, wow, like every time I start, I get sore on my first like 20-mile training run, and then it gets better. And then the other big thing, like, you know, when I was race directing for Air Viper Running, like I joked after the race, like I thanked myself because I founded Desert Solstice. Like that race actually exists because I put it on when I used to race direct. But the other big insights I got earlier on in my ultra career was race directing. I would watch a lot of people mess up in a lot of ways. And I feel like that was one of my cheat codes early on, is just watching other people race in all the ways that they look good early on, and their races progressively fall apart more and more. You can learn so much. Like if you want to do the same thing, just go volunteer at a race of interest and try to watch how people progress. Like the looped events are best because you can see them early on, in the middle, and late. So like Javelin 100, I would learn a ton. Desert Solstice, I would learn a ton. Like all these different kind of races, it's fascinating to watch the progression of all these different runners with all the different approaches, and then all the different ways it comes back to either bite them or pay off for them.
Yeah, a lot of that has to just going out too hard, going out too hot, I think, especially, you know, on a track or some of the flatter races. And even in Leadville, you know, the same sort of thing. Like I do the same thing where I'll be like, I'll see you later. See you later. I'm going to see you at Hope Pass. With the track being so relentless and pretty unforgiving to the body, do you ever do like a straightaway where you run backwards to kind of engage the hamstrings a little bit more? Has that ever been a tactic?
I feel like that's a favorite question. Is, yeah, someone was asking me that during the race this year, if backwards was a good idea or bad idea. And then the other one is people stride out. And my gut feeling after years of it and having tried some of that stuff earlier on in my career is that it feels good, but it's probably slightly bad. I don't think it's drastically bad, but I think it's high risk, meaning if you happen to have a tight muscle that you didn't know was there, it could pull by mixing it up that much. And so at best, like it mixes things up, but it's kind of like changing shoes. If you've ever changed shoes in an ultra, you know, like you're like, thank goodness, this feels so good. And then like a mile or two later, it goes exactly back to feeling exactly how bad it did before. Yeah. And so like it feels good to mix things up, but I don't think it has any lasting positive effect.
Cool. Rapid fire, Jim?
There's so many bad decafs, and there's a few that are okay. There's no good ones. But yeah, so I'll wean down like a month before to try to get a little sensitivity, and then I won't hit any caffeine until about 70 or 80% into a race.
Okay, cool. Nick, do you have any daily practices or daily rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of yourself?
Not too many. Like try to keep good hygiene, I suppose. So I breastfeed and all that. This year, I think actually one of the biggest things is I've gotten into a really solid like maintenance routine around whatever it is that I feel like is my biggest like deficit that can help with. So right now that's like scraping. So I've got those like torture metal tools and massage cream, and I'll go to town for like 20-30 minutes almost every morning on either my plantar or calves or whatever is giving me problems. And then I throw in some like air squats or squats with a lighter kettlebell, just to try to keep those things that are my biggest struggles moving forward.
Cool. You mentioned that you still have some lingering leg effects. Was that upper leg, lower leg?
It's all like lower leg. It's like kind of lower leg, like inside the shin, like almost behind it, and then like the peroneals on the outside. So again, probably all the stabilizer muscles, and probably because super shoes for 173 miles, and yeah, that can't do anything good for the legs.
Yeah.
Nick, what are you listening to right now, music-wise, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Oh, yeah. Music, I'm a hard rock kind of guy. So I actually don't listen to a lot of music, but when I do, it's definitely like the adrenaline pumping stuff. And then podcasts, I'm all over the place, like a handful of like tech, business, just interesting stuff.
And last but certainly not least, Nick, I know you're Arizona native, born and raised, correct?
Yep.
In the Phoenix area?
Yep.
Okay. Were you around for Phoenix Lights?
The like the zoo lights, or
with like what they thought might have been like contact?
Oh, I didn't even hear about that. I'm too disconnected.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I think it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like they even had like the mayor of Phoenix came out and they had like a alien like dressed up or whatever. But point being is if at any time when you're not preparing for races or taking care of whatever else you got going on late night, do you ever find yourself in a rabbit hole? Have you ever seen aliens in Phoenix or Scottsdale? Do you have any favorite conspiracy theories?
I actually have a good one that I have the answer to, but maybe you want to keep it a mystery. In the McDowells, in the very middle of them, there's this giant white if you look at like Google Maps, there's this giant white disc and then this other like rectangle next to it, just in the middle of nowhere. There's no trails to it. There's nothing. And like you can't see it from anywhere. And it's just like in the heart of it. And like I randomly found this one day on a satellite image. And then, yeah, Lauren and I were intrigued for years. And then we finally went out there to find out what it is. So I know the answer. I'll share it just because it's really interesting. It's like a wildlife reservoir. So it's a collector dish for rainwater, and then it feeds into a tank, which feeds like a basin for water, so that the animals out there, because there's not much water out here, can wander up to it and find water any time of year. And then it's just naturally self-sustaining.
Cool.
So, but that was my UFO for a couple of years until I went and found out where it was.
Got it out. Okay. Right on.
Nick, thank you so much. Love getting Ultra guys on here to talk running and talk about your epic performance you just had. So thanks for taking some time to talk with the Airey Bros.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is great.
Yeah, Nick, before we get you out of here, where do you want the good folks to find you? If you want them to find you on your blog, on your website, you got your socials, anything you want to get out there, put it out there. We'll put them in the show notes as well.
Yeah, my blog is Nick Coury Runs. I mostly made it to share the stuff I've learned, so go read it if you want. I'm Nick Coury Runs on, I think, Instagram and Facebook and whatever else is out there. So I only poke enough on social media to exist.
Yeah, you're better off. Do you have any races planned for 2022, or are you kind of taking it easy till you get your leg under control?
Yeah, I'm in Hard Rock because you have no choice but to sign up early. But I generally don't sign up for anything until I'm recovered from a 24-hour, because as I am right now, I don't know how long it's going to take.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we'll get you healed up quick, and then hopefully maybe we'll see you out here in Colorado this summer.
Yeah, I'll definitely be up there.
Awesome. Well, great, Nick. It was great talking to you. Appreciate your time tonight and all your insight. And have a great 2022.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, good night.